Hi, it's Raghu, and I am back this week with my oldest and bestest. David Silver is back with me. Dave, how you doing?
I'm great, thank you. I'm glad to be back on the rolling in the deep.
Yes. Um, and by the way, there is I get a lot of mail, and everyone's always asking about you. So just to fill everybody in a little bit, aside from, David has been working on a book, but I distracted him from his book because we gave him a major documentary project for Love Serve Remember Foundation on a very, very important figure in our lives, a mentor for us when we were in India with Neem Karoli Baba, with Maharaji. And his name is K.C. Tiwari, who is an incredible yogi that was disguised. Therein, the name of the movie, Brilliant Disguise. So, yeah, David is
Right.
assiduously working on it. He's been working on it this year. It's going to take, I don't know, a little bit more, but we hope to see the light of day towards the end of next year. Being that would be 18, and this is also our Happy New Year, everybody podcast.
Yeah, it's 2018, which is I like. This shows how simple-minded a human being can be. I prefer even numbers to odd numbers when it comes to years. I don't know why. But so I look forward to the 14, 16, 18. So it's 2018, and it's going to be a good year. I'm saying like a Pollyannic idiot, but it's all good, um, in the sense that our individual lives and consciousness are still intact,
Hmm.
and no matter what is going on in the on that low level of administrative politics, I think we've all learned now that we can withstand it without too much hatred, anger, and basic ugliness. And so, Happy New Year.
On that note, Happy New Year, everybody. Uh, um, at the same time, just want to tell people we're going to talk about a few different things here, and hopefully some of them are going to be constructive for ourselves, for David and I, and for everybody else who's listening to the podcast. In terms of some of the things we can do to help us along in not to diminish these very difficult times, and David is certainly not diminishing them, but this is the most positive outlook I've heard from him in about in a year at least. And so hopefully we'll be able to make a little bit of a contribution. We shall see. But one other contribution, and this is a bit of a, we wouldn't call it a commercial, but it's certainly an offering that we're making through Love Serve Remember Foundation, ramdas.org, which you all know I am part of, and it's called Transforming Difficult Emotions. So this is very apropos for our times, and it's taking many of essential Ram Dass talks, mostly pre-stroke, that really address this subject in a way that I think is going to be extraordinarily helpful. And there's also some wonderful meditations from him in more recent, in the last few years that we've pulled. And there'll be weekly Q&As with me and other teachers, Mirabai Bush and Lama Surya Das, and like that. So that's happening at the end of January. Please sign up. If you're not on ramdas.org email list, please do get on it, and then there'll be an email sent out to everybody. It'll be on the site coming up after early January, probably. So I do want to let everybody know to take that
Yeah, I
opportunity.
wanted to add to that, Raga, that I get the emails. Got one today, actually, words of wisdom, and usually I'm oblivious to this sort of stuff, and I don't know why, really. Kind of a little blasé about little things that come through in the mail. This is very different, and I can't think of one of them that I've received in the last few years that hasn't had a quick pinprick of of a quick renegotiation with reality, shall we say?
Oh, I love that. Renegotiation with reality.
Yeah. Whereby I read it and he says something, and I know you and Rachel choose them, and they're just so apropos somehow to the times we live in, and also they really just spark you into a kind of, oh yeah, that's true fear. I have fear, and where do I put fear? And there's always something very deep and quick, which is useful in our busy lives. That something so changing that just changes you very fast, and not in a superficial way that you forget it 10 minutes later. I don't. It resounds with me, and I encourage you to receive that newsletter. Really, indeed.
And it sets up your day. It can potentially sets up your day, so you have it in the back of your mind as you go through the routines that we all go through on a day-to-day basis, and the roles that we inhabit too. So one of the things that for those of you who don't know, and I don't think there's a lot because we have a lot of loyal listeners that have been listening since the beginning of Mindrolling. But David and I used to do little recommendations of things that we really loved, and it's just share with people, turn them on. And so I found something that is apropos also because it fits with what we're going to be talking about today. And so I wanted to just, I'm just going to play a little bit of this, and not the whole song because we're not allowed to, Dave, but we're going to take this shot because it's, and I'll tell you about the band afterwards. It's here it is. It's a song called Pain.
I've been turning up the dial, but I hear no
There we go. That's called Pain, and the band is The War on Drugs. Do we love that name? Kind of amazing. Yeah, I found this some time ago, Dave, and I know you know the band too. And yeah, they're obviously in the pocket with Petty, Springsteen, Dylan-esque, and so that really it appeals. But he's got some original stuff there as well, and I particularly like his words, and why I said that it a little bit rings with some of the things we're going to be talking about in the chorus. I resist what I cannot change. I want to find what can't be found, especially the part about resist what I cannot change. This is, and we'll get more into that a little later, but I think before we go in that direction, where we hopefully will come up with some stuff that makes sense for people, I found this article that I shared with David, and it was in the New York Times by a man named Ben Dolnick. It's called Donald Trump, Accidental Buddhist. I just thought it was the most riotously funny article, but it did have a semblance of something real that it brought up. And so basically it's about Trump talking about himself in the third person, right? How he does that. When Paul Manafort was indicted, he said there's not even a mention of Trump in there on the possibility of Russian interference in the election. Perhaps Trump just ran a great campaign. So this is pretty interesting how he gets this third person referral. So yeah, so I'm using that third person. It just it brought up a thing for this guy around Buddhism, and the core of Buddhism, of course, is around non-self. And Ben started to try using this methodology where you get outside yourself and you're talking in the third person, and it's all objective. Ben is feeling tired. Ben is considering blowing off the gym. Ben is feeling regret about eating that entire baguette while walking home from the grocery store. So he goes on. The teaching, Buddhists insist, has a potential to eliminate your suffering entirely. It turns out that what we refer to when we refer to ourselves in the third person is the very thing Buddhists believe causes much trouble. When I say, Ben can't stand the taste of turnips, I am forcing myself at grammatical gunpoint to inhabit a perspective outside my usual one. From this new vantage point, my feelings about turnips, not to mention the very thing I'm used to thinking of as myself, appear as objects separate from the one doing the speaking, which means that I, just by shifting into the speech patterns of a narcissistic lunatic, have stationed myself out in the hard-to-describe spaciousness where Buddhists say we do well to set up shop. I mean, what a correlation that he came up with.
Yeah.
All of which is to say, referring to yourself in the third person, if you do it thoughtfully and probably silently, need not be a step on the path towards celebrity rehab. It can instead be a means of finally realizing a life-altering truth. You are not your thoughts, and you are not your feeling. Now that my inner narrator has alternatives to I think and I feel, these seem not like self-help platitudes, but observable facts. Does that mean that Donald Trump, when he goes on about Donald Trump, is demonstrating his enlightenment? That when he refers to himself in the third person, he's expressing not a personality disorder, but an intuitive grasp of the subtlest Buddhist teachings. And then the last sentence is the killer. Ben highly doubts it. God.
Well, it's an amazing extrapolation. You couldn't imagine a more counterintuitive one. But I mean, he makes something of it. It's his way, I think, of dealing with this person in a way that is at least temporarily kind,
benign.
Benign, yeah. Though we know from a year's now experience, or actually 2.5 years. My God, it's the middle of 2015. We know what's going on there to some extent. But it is interesting that he says, these are not my thoughts. These are not my feelings. And that is pretty much a central aspect of at least, basic Buddhism, I think. Very helpful because I think, I found that constantly identifying with those things that come up in meditation, uh, in a very obnoxious manner, and it's hard to follow your bliss when these thoughts are coming in. But as you progress, you realize that they aren't indeed who you are. There are things that come from what psychologists for a long time have called modules. Modules. The different modules have insistence at different times in your heart or via the brain. And some of these modules become very insistent to the extent that you start thinking about them all the time. It's like having a song on your mind. You can't get rid of it. And it really helps in mindfulness meditation, in my opinion, to have a dynamic or an approach to the dynamic of the intrusion of these things, an approach which allows you to not fight them, not resist them, but to recognize them. And then from there have no or reduce anxiety about their, this is what I'm about. I'm such a terrible person. I constantly am thinking about whether, I can get a new flat screen, or whether I do have to talk to my sister, or whatever, these things that come into your head. And this funny article in the Times helped me, would help you if you read it too. See, not so much about Donald Trump, because, well, he's not an enigma. We got it. The word malignant narcissist seems to fit that which he is. But it does, bring to mind the question of our very constipated idea of ourself, that we are this piece of meat, that we are this meat with a brain, and that all the things that we think and feel are intrinsically who we are, as opposed to anybody else, and that we're not connected with anybody else, and the continuum of oneness is interrupted by these things, but not destroyed by it. And that's a question of steady work. Because in my current feeling, all the things we learned with psychedelics and initially with any kind of spiritual path was the quick realization of certain realities, of certain truths. But it takes a lifetime to absorb them to the point where they actually influence your behavior and your metta or loving kindness approach to all the other human beings that you encounter. And steadiness. I know that Krishnadas has talked about this in his workshops. I was actually at a workshop when he talked about this. The steady practice is the thing that will help us overcome fear and all the vicissitudes of self-doubt and lack of self-worth. And that's a paradox too, because we're not actually talking about self-worth. Oh, I am great because I wrote that song. I am great because I built that house. But self-worth as the big S self, what Emerson called the oversoul, the worth of it, the richness of it, the fullness of it. And that gets us back into the contradiction between fullness and emptiness, which I don't know whether you want to start talking about yet. But
yeah, well, I'd like to get there, but I think you ran through something which, talking about one of the things that psychedelics does, you get these very, very quick realizations. The connectivity of everything is one major one, where you are not this isolated little eye in the middle of this magma of humanity, right? And referring back to the article, the idea basically is that we all think of ourselves as an entity who our well-being occupies every waking thought. Okay, you have that realization, not just with a psychedelic, but also starting to do, when you realize there is a path and you want to get happy, and you can get happy perhaps through a path, a spiritual path, that this self-referential moment-to-moment stuff is killer. And, and it just absolutely, it can be depressing. And so you come up with that presence that the Buddhists have the most wonderful expression that I love to use. It's called self-cherishing, right? The amount, and we've talked about this before on many of our podcasts, but that self-cherishing, if you can insert that, the illusion of that self-cherishing, that is one of those quick things through realizations, through a psychedelic, through a meditation, through a piece of music, through God, walk in nature, where suddenly you realize you're not thinking and cherishing that self with all of the thoughts of what am I going to do, what happened to me, what am I going to do in the future, all of that. And so then you start, Buddhism is a great, it's a great tradition, because it definitely has a way for one to get a new vantage point around just this kind of stuff that we're talking about. And when they talk about no self, they're not talking about, and I know you're going to talk a little bit about emptiness. It's not nihilistic emptiness. It's not you walk around like you're a blank slate, like Being There, right? Peter Sellers and Being There, right? He was a blank slate, and everybody loved him because he was just, yes, this is all true to everybody who said anything. It's not that. It's you have stopped self-cherishing, and I think that is something I've always wanted to codify a little bit on these podcasts. So yeah, now definitely talk about. I think it came from a book that you've been reading, a little bit about non-self and emptiness.
The question of, okay, do you just went into it a little bit. It's not an emptiness which is meaningless or devoid of essence. It's all essence. So there have been some sort of dialectics in the last 50 years which have been seemingly opposing. One is the ability to absorb the oneness and get out of your self-cherishing and your constant worrying about whether you're doing the right thing or whether you're enjoying the right enjoyments, or all of that. You got that on the one hand, and then you've got the question of self-worth and empowerment on the other. And particularly for people who've been treated badly, which is 51% of the population, at least, women, and other people who've had difficulties forever. I mean, since time started, about being treated badly and being treated as if they're reduced and excoriated even, and even abused by neglect, all of these things. So it seems to me that there's sort of stages of this, that obviously if you've been abused as a child, or you've been sexually harassed or harassed in some other ways, it's important to move beyond that via various techniques. It can involve therapy, can involve many different ways of finding your own strength and equal self-worth. But I think that's the point, that the equality of self-worth, i.e. empowerment, is just that. It's equality. It's not superiority, or my self-worth is better than your self-worth, or I'm going to use my self-worth to prove to you how powerful I am and stop you being abusive of me. If you couple that with the idea that interconnectivity, and there is no difference between the background and the foreground in your perceptions, that in other words, somebody said, well, a tape measure is a tape measure. If it belonged to a plumber and you find it, you might use it. If it belonged to John F. Kennedy, it's worth $42,000. And what does that mean? Well, it means that our perception of it is more important than the actual it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is distorting because, I mean, some sheikh just bought a Da Vinci for $460 million.
What?
And, you know,
460 million?
Yeah, half $1 billion just last week at auction at Christie's, I guess.
Wow.
And he bought it, and he could afford it, obviously. And you think, well, it's a nice painting. But the question is there any worth that's worth discussing in a perception that Ram Dass has articulated better than anyone else, in my opinion? Well, along with Ramana Maharshi and other great saints and siddhas and teachers and wise men and women. But Ram Dass's words on this have been a real game changer for me for half a century, which is, you know, the famous story about loving the rug, loving the dirty rug on the floor, the piece of rug, just as much as loving, you know, your partner or, you know, I don't know, Adele or a really nice smelling rose or terrific spaghetti. Ram Dass made the point that if we really want to love, we are in fact loving that emptiness in the sense that the essence of it is not our own self-cherishing, as you put it, Raghu, but is a universal truth that cannot be compromised. In other words, you can't say, well, you know, I don't like crocodiles because they're kind of scaly and ugly and they ate my child.
Well, that's a good reason. So come on.
You might have a bit of dislike for the crocodile, but the crocodile doesn't know he's eating your child because, you know, she's Jewish or something.
No.
Crocodile's hungry. Crocodile's hungry. And I noticed with my crocodile, who is a calico cat, calicos are particularly moody, that even when she gives me a little bite, she's not doing it, you know, sort of in a Republican way. How about that for no self-care? She's doing it because she's a cat, and occasionally cats instinctively want to do that. And that gets back to a much deeper thought, which is the one of natural selection. That everything we do is based on the propagation of the species, based on, you know, what 500,000 years of growth of a species. And, you know, we either want to look nice so we can attract a mate so we can fornicate and have children, or we want to be fit so we can fornicate for longer than 8 seconds. And this is all natural selection. It is. It's what we've perfected as a species, just like, you know, the chameleon perfected how to look like a tree when another predator was coming after him. This is all survival.
By the way,
with, you know, I'm rambling on here.
No, I have to.
Sounds a little weird, but
no, I get it. You know what I don't get, and I never have gotten this from Ram Dass. This rug, I love this dirty, soiled rug. So it's a whole story where he, you know, Ram Dass is in a beautiful place of just being love and just relating that way with humans, with inanimate, animate objects, nature, whatever. He's in that place. So he was trying to make a point about that. And somebody, I love this rug. It was in a restaurant or something. You know, it was dirty. And the person said, are you trying to tell me that you love this rug as much as... It was Mickey Lemley who did Fierce Grace in the movie. Are you trying to tell me that you love this rug as much as I? And Ram Dass said, yeah. And so Mickey went and found a piece of dirty rug and sent it to him, and Ram Dass framed it and put it on his wall. It's too much, okay? There's no way that Ram Dass loves that dirty rug, okay, more than Mickey Lemley. There's no way or as much as Mickey Lemley, not more than Mickey Lemley, and I'll counter him on that. But yes, no, I understand.
Well, you know, it's some form of symbolic analogizing. It works in the sense that it makes you more conscious of the world around you that is you.
Tree, and, it could be a tree. A tree would be okay. I'd be good with a tree, not a dirty rug.
Well, he took it to the limit, you know. I mean, it's sort of like the classic, you know, sort of, and wrong, but classic sort of perception of someone who's tripping, you know, that they can just sort of, you know, look at the side of their glasses and go, oh, hey man, look at this tortoise shell. Look at that little brown bee. Wow, whoa, you know. And we all did it. I did it,
Yeah,
and
that's
still do
true.
it. And you know, sometimes it does mean that just looking at something essentially trivial and seeing it's really what it is you and it together living at the same time. The pen, the hard drive, the pair of glasses, whatever. Um, that you are there together, and uniquely so in that second, whatever. And that if you actually do become incredibly dividing and discriminating about what you do and do not absorb or appreciate, it brings about divisiveness, which again brings about self-cherishing. So,
Yeah.
and there is the beginning of the First World War, the Second World War, the 92,000 wars that have gone on in our lifetime. You know, it starts with that, with not being willing to go outside your normal conditioned model, if you like. I mean, it's really easy to love music, you know, and it's also really easy to hate music. I always hated the Carpenters. Now, some of you listening will think I'm talking about, you know, guys who do woodwork, but there was a band called the Carpenters in the
Karen
60s, which was
Carpenter.
there, you know, along with the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan and Buffalo Springfield and Neil Young and all the geniuses. There was this band called the Carpenters, and every time they came on television, I would have to avoid, you know, throwing up, and I really hated them, and I just did. And Karen Carpenter died, unfortunately, from some anorexic disease, I believe.
Yeah.
And what I think the dirty rug for me was there are people who got a lot from the Carpenters. So without being too anodyne, I have changed to some extent. That I still don't like the Carpenters' music, but I have to appreciate that I'm not alone in this world. And that there are people who got as much from their music for whatever reason, karmic development, the shape of their experience, the shape of their conditioning, as I did out of Blonde on Blonde or Revolver or you know, Harvest. You know, I thought those bands were supreme and everything else stank, you know.
Okay, we can't compare. Okay, see. Here's where I go back to the rug, comparing the dirty rug and Mickey. I'm being the devil's advocate a little bit here. Of course, I totally, absolutely agree with you and understand what you're saying. But when you mix up the Carpenters versus Neil Young and the Stones, or you know, come on. I don't care who likes the Carpenters. Okay. That's just wrong view as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it's the same with Trump, isn't it? I mean, who could like this bloody moron? Who could like this repellent being? Who could ever believe him? And, you know, the more we get into this, the more we realize that there are people who adore him.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Adore him.
You're right.
And if you actually talk to them, what they can't believe is that you would have any liking for Bernie Sanders. You know, that horrible old communist, you know, hypocrite, they would call him, or a fucktard is, I think, the current, or libtard. These are current words that are out now. And then you see that hatred coming back at you for loving Bernie or someone. And you realize, oh my God, this divisiveness is not loving the rug, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a hard one. It's a tough one, because, you know, do you know anyone who loves Trump?
Personally?
Yeah.
No. How could I? I'm in that. You know, I'm Canadian and you're British. How could we?
No, we you know, I know one person who does. And he's a nice guy, but since he told me that he did, my you know, then I had a hard time being at one with him.
Friendly.
Yeah, it was hard.
So it's back to the rug then, yeah. Back to loving the rug. Yeah. No, it's a great analogy now that I think about it. It really is. But isn't this a lot about you know what you said here? I love this. Renegotiation with reality.
Constant.
Yeah.
It's constant.
Yeah. And that negotiation has to do with interior inquiry in my mind, so that through
Yes.
meditation, through practices, whatever, and that interior inquiry looks at the vast amount of projections that we have no idea that they are, I would say, for the most part, false projections. In the case about, you want to talk about people who love Trump or who appreciate what he's done, revolutionizing politics and not following the status quo and everything else they love about him. The amount of the way in which we project onto the individual, like this individual that you do know who is into him, and then it became hard for you to have any real relationship with that person because of the divide was so wide. But he, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, doesn't everybody want to just be happy? Doesn't everybody want to have love in their life? Feel good, feel secure, feel safe? Absolutely. But what we're doing is projecting all of the things that he represents to us onto that person, and we have no chance. And I'm prime. I do this. I mean, I am so. I see what I do, and I even can't stop it. I can't stop the projections. I see them clearly. I've gotten to a place where in my life, maybe through all just getting older and wiser, and hopefully through some of the practices that I have done over the decades, that I can see them very clearly. And it causes suffering. It really does.
Yeah, because I mean, apart from just the suffering, immediate suffering, because you are who you are, and you've been absorbing, for instance, Buddhist lore, Buddhist teachings for so long, you can't help but think, well, do I carry these things into the next incarnation?
Yeah.
Because they sort of imply that what you don't solve in one life will definitely come back. And even though one can argue about, the reality of that without much actual knowledge, unless you're, Milarepa or someone, it doesn't even, you don't even have to go to the next life. You go to this life and see that those projections that you speak of, which you honestly speak of, which we all seem to have, affect this life tremendously. With that you don't like something, so when it comes up, immediately you get stirred up about it, and the rug, the dirty rug, goes into the garbage immediately. You don't look at that rug and go, it's part of God's plan.
Yeah.
That it's sort of like when people from the South, particularly evangelicals that I've met, will always say things like, well, we don't approve of homosexuals at all, but bless their hearts. And I feel like punching them in the face when they say that. It's like, well, why the fuck don't you tell the truth? You don't like them. You think it's an abomination. That's the word that people use when they talk about same-sex marriage and such things. And it, in my opinion, it doesn't so much, it does affect gays, obviously, who are made to feel uncomfortable and have difficult lives and can't visit their partners in hospital, for God's sake, because they're not, quote, family, all this rubbish. But it also influences the person who is making that statement. How much division and how little oneness there is when a person that supposedly follows Jesus Christ. I watched King of Kings yesterday. I tend to watch King of Kings every Christmas.
No, get out.
I do. I don't watch it all. It's 12 hours long or something. But I watched the part where, Herod is screaming at...
Wait, what is King of Kings? Because, I've heard
the story
of
of Jesus, when it's the version of Jeffrey Hunter when he plays Christ. It was made in the 50s, I think.
Oh, really?
And it's a huge, long epic, and it's beautifully done. But what you see, what comes out is that Christ said, I don't even I don't even blame or say bad things about the people that are putting me on the cross, the Roman soldiers. And my philosophy is forgiveness and metta yoga. You know, the propagation of universal kindness. And then you see that the evangelical Christian or the fundamentalist Muslim, or even people in the dancehall reggae religion who hate homosexuals. And you wonder, well, wait a minute, how can you put this together? How do you put this together? That your guy, the great yogi Jesus, said, be kind, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. And yet you will not bake a cake for a gay couple. Get the fuck out of here, is what I say to them. And they're not the rug to me. I rather, lie down with the dirty rug than lie down with people who say they follow Jesus and yet can't absorb different modalities of human interaction.
Well, they are the dirty rug. They are that dirty rug that we want to just throw out or dismiss. In my case, dismiss. How could you can't love that the way you love your friend. Come on. So that is part of the gigantic polarization and how far we are from being able to integrate the reality of interconnectedness.
But surely, Raghu, I remember being in that great market in Delhi, the famous one, the name I've forgotten. You know it. It begins with a K.
Oh, Khan Market, yeah.
Yeah. And I went there to buy a bag or something, and there were like 900,000 people there. And I was wandering around like some ridiculous Englishman, lost. And this gentleman, a Sikh, came up to me and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, I'm lost. I don't know where I came in. I don't know where to leave." And he said, "Oh, come and have a cup of tea with us." And I went to the stall, and they sold bags there. And there were 5 Sikh men in there. And they made me a cup of English breakfast tea, Twinings, and said, where are you from and all this. And we spent 45 minutes exchanging information about what we believed, And they didn't want to talk to me about that. They were just wanting to be kind. They saw a lost little soul walking around and thought, oh, this poor Englishman or German or Swede or whatever the heck he is, we're going to help him. They didn't. They saw the dirty rug in the dirty Englishman. And, I think, I just remember this because they were so incredibly hospitable, instantaneously to someone they did not know. And, I'm not saying that doesn't happen in Charlottesville or Monterey or, Indianapolis. It does. But I remember this incident because I was lost and I was a little bit freaked out. It was 101 degrees, and I was freaking out and not visibly, but they could feel it and they just came over to help me. And, that is part of the rug, I think. The idea of going out of your way to show that you feel the same way about that person you're looking at as best you can. You are with that person. You feel their pain.
Yeah. Now, of course, you have to remember, it is embedded in Indian culture. The guest is God. They have that. We don't quite have that. And although it happens all the time, just out of natural heartfulness on behalf of many people who you see it in the news, you read it in the papers, happens all the time. I think that there's, in terms of us talking about how lost in projections we are, and that affects us so deeply and causes the kind of situation of the deep polarization within ourselves and outside of ourselves. And the fact is that this polarization and this propensity for projecting onto everything, people and objects, and Ram Dass tells that great. So you go into the forest. Do you judge one tree over another? Of course not. But even that we do. Oh, beautiful. Oh, yeah. Ignore that. So that happens all the time. And I think the one concept that we haven't discussed here that I think is extraordinarily important, and that's karma. And the way that our experience of the world is formed by past karma, not just from how we grew up and our parents and the culture, that society that we were in, but of course one has. This is an assumption that everyone has a definitive connectivity to the fact that there is rebirth. There is a continuity, and of course there's many different versions of what is that continuity. What does that represent? A soul, Buddha mind, a spirit, whatever. We don't know that. We can just call it the mystery. But certainly, deep from our past, we are shaped by karma. And we can discuss what karma is. And it's a very complex and can be subtle. It's not just action, reaction, although that is part of it. But the thing that's to me most interesting is that every day we constantly create new karma, and that's and that is, in many ways, it's an opportunity, right? And that lies within how you react to stuff. For instance, right? The thing that everybody can, of course, recognize is driving in a car and you get cut off. What's your instant reaction? Is epithets. You mother, and some people even take out a gun and shoot you. I mean, to that extreme. So your reaction, you create karma that will color your future by virtue of how you react to events, moment to moment to moment, all the way to thoughts, positive or negative, actions, positive or negative thoughts. I mean, it gets down to a really subtle level that just you don't roll down your window and yell at the person who cut you off. You don't do anything, you don't look or anything, but in your mind you're going, you goddamn mother. You're doing that. That is creating karma, just that. So it's like, how do we pay attention to each moment and understand the reality of what we are creating and shaping our experience and shaping what possibly not only can affect the projections that we constantly are forming about people, events, moments, but for the future. I mean, it's an opportunity that we all are not that, our awareness level is really low. So,
well, I mean, that's where excuse me,
no, go ahead.
Finish. Well, the intrusion of a teacher or of a great wise person, at least, but sometimes as you experienced with Maharaji and Anandamayi Ma and Siddhima, and obviously there are others that other people are drawn to for karmic reasons. Ramana Maharshi, Ramakrishna. The intrusion of them in your life is one of the great redemptive ways of dealing with karma, because they interrupt your continuum of comfort, which is hating people you hate, hating music you hate, hating food you hate, loving movies you love, loving people who are nice to you and love you. Oh, I love him because he loves me. I mean, I really had, I mean, I've repeated this many times, but I had this great sort of friendship with Richard Nixon. When I say this, I can't believe I'm saying it, but we got along when I interviewed him, and then years later when I saw him again. And it was a teaching to me, because he was one of the most hated people on the planet. No question about it. He was in the top 5. He was at the Billboard top of the charts of hateable people. And when I encountered him personally, my friends in Cambridge, where I lived at the time, were all, activists and against the war in Vietnam, and I was criticized heavily by my close friends saying, why did you meet with this guy? And why did you interview him? All this. And what I found when I was with him, that underneath all that criminality and sort of force and American hegemonic impulses was a quiet and rather kindly person. I was fortunate enough to actually encounter that part of him.
Yeah.
And I knew nothing. I was 23. My father hated Nixon more than I can say, so I was indoctrinated against him. If I'd have come into contact with great gurus at that time, I think I would have been more comfortable with that situation with my friends, to be able to smile at my friends and say, you know, you can say what you want, but I actually encountered a human being just like you, who made some very bad decisions and had some lousy karma. I mean, karma that made him lie to the Watergate Committee, made him bomb Cambodia for no reason. The war was with Vietnam, not Cambodia. And that war was pretty obnoxious, as we know. You can forgive that person. Can you be friendly with that person? Rather doubt it. I don't think I could be friendly with Mike Pence. I just don't see it. So we go back to the projection again. But my actually just saying that I couldn't be friendly with Mike Pence is not great karma. In other words, I'm injecting a negative judgment into something that I do not have a total overview of.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it was, you know, Karnam Rita, the kirtan singer.
Yeah.
It was her birthday a couple of days ago. So I wrote to her on Facebook and said, you know, happy birthday. But I sent with it a little article called Ramana Maharshi on Birthdays.
Mm-hmm.
And Ramana, and I remembered it, I found it. I couldn't find the book it was in, but I found it on Google, you know, the Akashic records of the world. And he said, why do we celebrate birthdays? What are we, crazy? These are death days. We've been injected back into this fleshly, ridiculous, illusory, karma-heavy world, which we would want to be out of. So why are you celebrating this birthday? Celebrate your death day, folks. Mm. And Ramana Maharshi was not, you know, some TV pundit.
He wasn't Jimmy Swaggart, no.
No. And I mean, he wasn't saying, hate your birthday, but he was just saying, these are contradictions like the dirty rug, which are not obvious until a major master tells you that. And then you have the choice of believing it or not. But if you do believe it, as I do, he's basically saying, you know, you celebrate your birthday and you think it's so cool. But, you know, isn't every day your birthday and is every day your death day? And why are you celebrating this particular day? Well, because we're humans and we live in America and we send presents and we, you know, we like getting a book in the mail and we like someone saying, happy birthday, Dave. It's great that you're alive. So there's two sides to it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that the teachings that come from the masters are essential to our growth because we don't think them on our own. We seem incapable. We're projecting all the time. Yeah. And therefore, I'm very constantly grateful. I'm making this film with you about K.C. Tiwari, Maharaj's great devotee, great yogi. Because I'm working on it all the time, I'm constantly reminded about the existence of a person like him. I'm a very lucky guy. I could be working on a film about helicopters. I did, in fact, make a film about helicopters at one point. But now I'm making a film about him. And the constant reminder of his kindness and his depth and his devotion and his complete and absolute sort of relegation of comfort zone life into something else. Yes, he'd like to be happy just like everybody. But I mean, K.C. Tiwari, who many of you don't know, I'm sure, but maybe hopefully will after the film is done, was a man that just wanted to help people and help himself and be the most devoted being of his guru, Nimkaroli. So, you know, I'm learning from him. If he weren't in my life, I think my karma, like many others, you know, I think my karma would be diminished, or not diminished. My understanding would be diminished. of the constant presence of the possibility of either growing or sticking with 2 feet in the concrete until it calcifies and you calcify.
Yeah. Let me tell you, because you're reminding me of a great story, actually. In terms, so this K.C. Tiwari was a very highly, as David said, a yogi and a highly advanced being. He had spiritual powers, all of it. He was left by Maharaji to be our mentor the day that Maharaji left the ashram and said, "I'm gone," and he dropped his blanket and he went off and died. So he left Tiwari, and that's why Tiwari has meant so much to us, because he understood also the psychology of Western mind. He was incredible. So, and he was not at all living in polarization. That was just one of the most exceptional experiences that I have to be with someone on a day-to-day basis like that. So one day, we were up high in the Himalayas, and he took me to a temple that he had put together for Hanuman, the monkey god. It was a beautiful, enormous statue of Hanuman. So one day we're just walking by the river, which was just a few hundred yards from the temple, and just talking, and someone comes running down and said, "Oh, Baba, there's a Swami has come, and he's sitting, and you should come and greet him, and come see him." So he says, "Okay, fine." And 2 of us walk up to the temple where there was a room where people could stay. On the way there, talk about projection, I immediately projected and said to him, or did I say it to him? Maybe I didn't, but I know it was in my mind. Oh shit, he's going to see a Westerner, a young Westerner, and I'm going to get Hindu Spirituality 101. I know it. Swamiji is going to give it to me, right? So sure enough, we went and sat with him, a lovely Swami, and he went off pontificating about 10 billion times more than I had projected he would. And I sat there, squirmed the whole time. I look over at Tiwari. He's looking at this guy with adoration, like it's the first time he ever heard anybody expound on spiritual life according to the Hindu thing. And I tell you, so, and then we got up to go, and we were walking, just the 2 of us. We got to, as we left, I said, "Geez, this guy did exactly what it was I was going to think. I had to sit there and listen to this." I just went off, right? And he looked at me, and he just like, "Are you out of your mind?" In fact, you know what he used to do sometimes? He would put his forefinger and thumb together and onto your temple of your head, and he'd make a screwing in motion. "I think you need to get your screw a little bit tighter there, my boy," he'd say. It's the word. It's the words. It's everything is anew, fresh. Take it in the moment. And it was the most gigantic example of this projection that had put me in a place where I couldn't hear one thing that this guy was saying.
Right.
Even if he wasn't in the most heartful place, which I'm sure that was part of it too. Even if that's true, I was just immediately got into this absolute bullshit. And my God, do we not do this on a day-to-day basis? And then just, Dave, in terms of talking about karma too, how do you stop that kind of cycle that we get into, where you're just going on these karmic shapes that from your past that are shaping your experience now, and how do you stop that cycle? And because it's endless, right? I mean, it's an endless cycle of being entrapped by past karma and then creating more of it. And our most beloved teacher, you and I, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, how much did he talk about creating a gap? Gaining skillful means, which through practice, and creating a gap that extricates yourself from the cycle. And then, of course, allows the building of compassion and inner ease and connectivity with whatever is in front of you. As Ram Dass, as that the dirty rug story, we go back to that and back and back and back, and that is what he's doing now. He is interacting on that basis. He is not projecting anything. He's coming from the connectivity of love, the real love, not that bullshit word that we can't hardly even use. I mean, you could say unconditional love gives it a little bit better of a twist. But and I just want to mention this because, oh boy, we've been going on here for a while, eh?
Oh, really?
But, yeah, but I do want to mention this one thing that I'm hoping could be helpful. It's something I read actually by Trungram Gyalwa Rinpoche, another incredible Rinpoche. They have so many
of them.
It's like, where do they get them all? I mean, it's incredible. So just in terms of dealing with the most simplistic stuff, I mean, we talked about, when you get cut off or somebody gets, he talks about somebody gets a promotion that you thought you deserved, you get jealous, or your desire systems are so strong you can't stop eating, whatever's in front of you, sweets, this, that, and the other. Just simple things, anger, impatience, shock, desire, frustration, all of the emotions, right? Which leads me back to recommending again. Don't forget Ram Dass is Transforming Disturbing Emotions coming up at the end of January, because it absolutely addresses this stuff and would allow for us to stop that cycle, the karmic cycle. But he recommends three things. It's like three moments. The first moment is everything with your senses, your eyes, ears, nose. You perceive the input. Okay, so it's like a sound reaching your ear and you perceive it. It's instantaneous. It's effortless. And then you've at least got the perception of the feeling, right? The feeling, because it's so easy. You hear, you see, you smell, you touch, you feel, right? So, and then the second moment is you recognize this and you take a pause. So in the recognition, there's a pause. So you don't chase that. It's like you walk past some garbage, right? And Delhi, I mean, how many times I've walked past garbage in Delhi. Forget any garbage. You've never smelled anything like this.
No,
it's enough to kill you. It's unbelievable. I mean, you actually are so instead of following that all the way into the recoil, you recognize it and you're not following it. You stop following it. And your reaction may be mental, verbal, or physical. Okay. So the third thing is around reacting. And you stop that reaction with awareness. You classified it as bad, you push it away, and that in itself does the immediate damage. So by just, first of all, recognizing through the senses and then seeing it arise and then absolutely stop the reaction, you widen the gap. Here's what he says. By widening the gap between action and reaction, you gain some distance from your automatic responses and also gain an opportunity, this is great, to know your emotions. Right? I mean, the simple thing, and this is all mindfulness stuff, right? Which is the big byword in our culture now in the West, especially in America. And not always, in my mind, used in the right way, and maybe used for gain rather than for internal inquiry. but I love this thing where it's look at what you can gain an awareness of it's an opportunity to understand yourself.
Yes.
That's what we need, is that opportunity and that gap. Just by creating a little gap between when this stuff gets input to us and we realize it through our sensory perceptions that it is happening, and then you have the awareness that it's happening, and it's arising. So you can actually be on top of its arising rather than lost in it. And then just create the gap there through the reaction. I think it's a great little methodology. It's a simple little 3-part thing that we all can use on a day-to-day basis.
But it still takes work, and
Yep.
That's why the word practice, which is close to the word rehearsal, that no matter how great you are, say as a musician, even a classical Indian musician or American musician, European, you cannot maintain your ability to play the music unless you practice. And I often use this as a correlation to myself when I miss meditations. I missed one yesterday. I just didn't do it. And I didn't do it because I got up in a rather nasty temper and I just had to have coffee instead of meditation. And when I meditated today, I noticed there was a little gap. There was a little moment when I had to catch up.
Not the right gap, a different gap.
Not the right gap. Right. And just, and funny, I read a funny thing a couple of weeks ago in the New York Post, great spiritual journal. And it was about Billy Bush. And Billy Bush gave an interview where he said, he was looking for a job, actually. And somebody asked him about, the obvious Access Hollywood, Donald Trump thing, which the guy was fired from NBC at the highest level in the Today Show. I think they were even thinking about putting him in a much more prominent, and they just got rid of him. And he said, well, this year has been quite something, because I've been completely, people hate me. He said, but I know what I did. I chuckled along with him about his assault on women and his braggadocio about assaulting women, which is almost as bad. And I kind of went, yeah, about it. He said, but then I couldn't handle it. So I got into intense mindfulness meditation.
Really?
Yes. Oh. And he said, as I've become practiced at this, as I'm learning it, as I'm doing it on a regular basis, I now can see that it wasn't that I didn't mean that with Trump. I was there. I was going along with it. I was au fait with it, as they say. And now I see what an idiot I was. Like, just plain idiot. What was I thinking? But if it hadn't happened that I got fired and excoriated by the world, I would never have had to. He said it was agonizing, totally agonizing. Everybody hated me. Everybody. And they already hate his family, so it was a bit difficult. He was the only popular Bush in history. And he said that meditation has pulled him out of it, even though he still goes through a lot of hell about it. He can see not that he doesn't deserve to be hated. He can see that what a limited space he was in as a human being. Successful, famous, good looking, doing great. Everything was going great. And then he made that terrible mistake of going, yeah, Donald, yeah. And even and I believed him. It wasn't some superficial nonsense that he was spouting. He said, I'm practicing this thing because it's the only thing that's helping me.
Yeah, and look, he would never have done that had that incident hadn't happened.
Never.
Possibly, he would never have done that. And that's, this is for another podcast, Dave, because we're at the end of this one. But one thing I was going to bring up is this Zen saying, one accident is worth 10,000 meditations. One accident is worth 10,000 meditations. Is that... that's so true. And that's what happens with many of us. Many of us. And as suffering gets to a certain point where you just have no recourse but to I'll take an alternative course in your life and do the kinds of things like this guy Billy did that turned it around for him, and probably turned it around in a much grander sense in his life than this stupid incident or even his job at NBC. Yeah. God knows how this is affecting in terms of his karma. It's a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it proves that, every exquisite little moment of our lives, good, bad, or indifferent, is going to affect every moment after that.
Right.
And that we and the rug, the dirty rug, which it's made such an impression on me, this story, not just because of Mickey's response to it, or when he was talking about this at the time, I remember thinking, as difficult as it is to absorb that attitude, that mood, it's like when we used to get high, and or even if we get high now, that appreciation for everything comes into play suddenly. You're not, you can, I guess you can. You can go, typical of those days. I'll go and see the movie 2001, Kubrick's great psychedelic space movie. And a lot of people took acid and went to see it. I didn't. I just went to see it. And you're glued to that movie, and you're talking about that movie. And people are glued to virtual reality now, and getting these ridiculous machines on your head to look at something that you actually could look at for real and, be in it for real, as it were, and enjoy it. But we've become so consumerized and so bored and so needing for stimulation all the time that we need to actually virtually reality. Look, okay, you say, I'm never going to jump out of an airplane, so let me look at virtual reality. Okay, fine. If that's what you want to do, fine. I think it's better to jump out of the airplane. But we've got to the point where we do not appreciate the very fabric of daily life, of our experience, because we've become a consumerist being. We consume. Animals don't consume. Sadhus don't consume. Little Maharaji didn't. I mean, the original Little Maharaji, not Maharaji, the other one. He didn't consume anything. They just had the clothes they wore, and they sat there and they consumed the universe, and meanwhile I'm complaining about Netflix every day. I say to someone else, when are they going to get new films? I hate them. They just put up their now $10.99 a month, and I haven't seen one good thing for 6 months. I'm going to get rid of it.
Okay, I'm going to save you today.
So
wait a minute.
To save from that.
Okay, well, here it is. Here's a recommendation. Spike Lee's She's Gotta Have It. He redid that as a 10-part series. It's on Netflix.
Are you kidding?
Somebody turned me on to it. It has some of the greatest music, and even tells you who sang the song. It comes up as a card, as a slate. The protagonist, the woman in it, is just absolutely so relatable and wonderful, and it's fantastic. There you go. Okay, I've saved you, David Silver.
Thank you. I love it. I love Netflix.
All right.
It's like when Randy Newman sang the song "I Love L.A." I began to learn to love L.A. It was difficult, but I mean. Hey, I was going to read something from Pema Chodron, but it all is in the same continuum.
Listen, we're going to have to do another one. I have a whole thing around Ram Dass's thing about suffering brings me to God. It was kind of like the rug. What do you mean? People go, are you out of your mind? I have a whole wonderful thing. So we have two.
So what have we been talking about for the past hour?
I don't know.
We didn't get to any of this. We got to the Donald Trump accidental Buddhist.
Yes, and there you go. Anyhow, we're going to do it again, and I'm super happy that you came on for the Mindrolling New Year's show of 2018. Great. And God, we've been. I'm really so happy that we're able to continue, and the way in which you have been an inspiration, Dave, as I've done a lot of these things more recently because I've been on my own. But the inspiration is fantastic from you, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I mean, the Svoboda thing, which you just did, is getting enormous response, I notice, and I'm about to listen to it today. And that alone, if you did nothing else apart from get that guy to elucidate some of the techniques and some of the what's behind the karma of addiction and so on. That's incredible.
Absolutely.
That's incredible.
I have to say that too. And everybody out there, look for Mindrolling. That's a couple episodes ago with Robert Svoboda, who wrote these incredible books on Agora. These Agora practitioners from India. He had his guru was Vimalananda, and was extraordinary being. And Robert is an extraordinary being. And it's a difficult subject, karma, and I'm going to be investigating it, Dave, more with all of our teacher friends from Jack, Joseph, and all of them in the coming weeks, because I think this is an important aspect of the spiritual path that bears more understanding. So thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you.
Namaste, everybody. Go to Be Here Now Network. Happy New Year. And come to, go to BeHereNowNetwork.com and /mindrolling. And you'll also, all the stuff we're talking about today and recommendations, all the way to the war on drugs, that song we played at the beginning, and everything else you'll be linked to. And we shall see you next week.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.